existence. To break this genetic command over existence for thousands of years, spiritual adepts, seekers, would also be renunciates. They would be sannyasis. They would escape into the desert or the mountains, and they would associate with nothing that would disrupt their ability to bring about a higher consciousness. So they wouldn't deal with any of the orientations toward the genetic survival. So much so that a story was attached to it. And the story that was attached to it that completely corrupted and disfigured the idea of spirituality was that if you engaged in the visceral, you weren't spiritual. About 500 years ago, that determinant had reached its pinnacle. It was time for a shift. And that's when Guru Nanak, Udasi Yogi, introduced the idea of mastery while involved in everything. And it was called Grishna Ashram. And it meant the life of enlightened householders. It meant that you engaged in the world, you did everything in the world, and you still attained enlightenment. Because let's face it, enlightenment is not going to be very popular. You have to give everything up in order to achieve it. Nor is it going to be very honest if you claim that that's a prerequisite, because it isn't. So you have to walk a path between the physical vessel, this exquisite instrument, driven by DNA with everything that it contains, which is the physical drive, the emotional drive, which is rendered out of the physical, and the psychic drive, which are the thoughts that the physical engage of the brain contracts from the universal broadcast or the universal mind. What if you were to discover that if you were open, if you were relaxed, that you would be able to receive so much more information in each frame of the brain that it would begin to disrupt your sensation of identity. Because the only thing that DNA has to base its survival on is an individuated identity. That's a marker that DNA plants in time and space and uses to determine whether or not your identity is surviving, is sustaining, or if it's draining. And what if, as you opened your consciousness by being open and by being relaxed, it would begin to fill you with so much information that you would actually end up with more information that demonstrated your similarity than the information that demonstrated your uniqueness. A trigger would fire inside your psyche that you were in danger, and I'll use an extreme word, you are in danger of annihilation. It may just be psychic annihilation or emotional cognition, emotional capacity to identify the self through the sensations and the emotions that one is feeling in each moment. But what it would ultimately threaten, because if it doesn't get your attention at a psychic level and it doesn't get your attention at an emotional level, it will go to whatever level it has to get your attention. And ultimately you will feel like you are dying physically. You are about to be destroyed physically, and what you will say was, being open and relaxed is a stupid idea. I better get back to reality. And it will use all kinds of stories and phrasing in order to get you back to that place where you're spending more time attending to your individuation than you are attending to your enlightenment, your liberation. And that's why it takes so much discipline to maintain your focus on your relaxation and your openness after you get to a certain level. You know, people think they come into this life and they suddenly become awake and aware of just the basics, like walking and talking. And most people can't remember much before, 3, 4, or 5 years old. But there was a lot going on in those times. But it doesn't really matter, because even in their 6, 7, and 8, you can only remember a few scenes of your life. And then 9, 10, 11, 12, you start to remember a little bit more, but you don't remember what was real. You remember what is remembered. And memory is stacked according to your survival, according to your identity. Moments in which your identity was threatened, you lost good friends, or you had to move away from someplace, you had to start a new school. Those things very much register in your psyche. But if things were just going along in a middle path, and you were just cool, you got this kind of blur because there's no crisis. What if, in your process of practicing your daily practice, your yoga, your meditation, your chanting, you're walking your dog, you're relating to people from the heart center, you're swimming, you're doing whatever you do to enable yourself to be fulfilled and relaxed. What if you opened up that extra capacity to bring in information, and your identity began to dissolve, and you weren't fixated on your identity? That is called surrender. And in today's world, the crisis is not between people that believe this and people who believe that, or this political circumstance and this political circumstance. The crisis is between the idea that is evolving more robustly of enlightened surrender and DNA, which is fixated on individual identity. And just like DNA's urge to maintain itself through generations is the driving force behind all romance, DNA's urge to maintain its individual identity is the